Hello, my name is Phil. I'm the rector of the Draycote and Leam Valley Benefice. This is my Sunday sermon for the 23rd of August 2026. If you've been watching us over the summer, you may have noticed that I'm going even more rogue than usual in the sermons. I've been even more off lectionary than usual. And the reason for that is that right at the start of this summer, I shared with you that my spiritual director had challenged me to be on the lookout for grace in all I see and do. And so, quite deliberately, this summer, rather than just starting with what reading was in the lectionary, I've been paying attention to the world around me and looking and saying, actually, what is God saying? Where is God in the day today? That's kind of where I start my starting place for my sermons this Sunday. And this week, the kind of theme that caught my attention was the theme of hope. And it really kind of struck me when I was binge watching The Rapture on BBC iPlayer. Without giving away too many spoilers, one of the key strands of the storyline is the emergence of a group called the Faithway. It's run by a man called Leonard, who's a kind of vicar, who's trying to create a new faith group that's more inclusive. It's not really worshipping the Christian God, but rather the idea of a God or a kind of a universal higher power. And the message of this new group is essentially in times of uncertainty and anxiety, you just need to choose hope. And throughout the whole series, you see people wearing brightly coloured t-shirts that say choose hope. And they've got services and they've got live streams and they've got publicity everywhere. And there's a really interesting clash between this Faithway group and an environmental group called Climate Front, who are warning people about the effects of climate change in ever more elaborate publicity stunts. And the really interesting thing is that the Faithway group keeps saying choose hope in the face of increasingly obvious problems. And so the series kind of asks a slightly cynical question. What exactly do we mean by hope? Is hope simply thinking positively, refusing to worry? Is it putting your fingers in your ears and pretending that everything is going to be all right? That's a slightly cynical reading of hope, but it's one that's there in the Rapture. And watching it made me think about hope. And thinking about that word hope took me to quite a recent album. RAYE's album is called The Music. This music may contain hope. And there's a track on the album which includes some words from Psalm 30. And Psalm 30 is the psalm I've chosen for our reading today. I'm going to read that for you now. I will exalt you, Lord, for you lifted me out of the depths and did not let my enemies gloat over me. Lord my God, I called to you for help and you healed me. Lord, you brought me up from the realm of the dead. You spared me from going down to the pit. Sing the praises of the Lord, you his faithful people. Praise his holy name. For his anger lasts only a moment, but his favour lasts a lifetime. Weeping may stay for the night, but rejoicing comes in the morning. When I felt secure, I said, I will never be shaken. Lord, when you favoured me, you made my royal mountain stand firm. But when you hid your face, I was dismayed. To you, Lord, I called. To the Lord I cried for mercy. What is gained if I am silenced, if I go down to the pit? Will the dust praise you? Will it proclaim your faithfulness? Hear, Lord, and be merciful to me. Lord, be my help. You turned my wailing into dancing. You removed my sackcloth and clothed me with joy, that my heart may sing your praises and may not be silent. Lord, my God, I will praise you forever. So as I said, the word hope is what I wanted to hang this talk on. And RAYE has referenced hope in the name of her album, which was kind of linked to this psalm. But notice in the psalm, the word hope doesn't actually appear. And I think that's quite central to what I want to say, because there is a kind of cheap hope, the kind of secular understanding of hope, which is about denying reality and just blind hoping that things will get better. That's the hope that the faith way is talking about in the Rapture. In other words, put your fingers in your ears and pretend the bad stuff isn't happening. And that's very different from the hope that we find in our psalm, because our psalm doesn't deny that things are difficult. It doesn't say that we shouldn't weep. It says, weeping may stay for the night, but rejoicing comes in the morning. If you're an aficionado of the old King James translation, you may know the second half of that verse as saying, joy comes in the morning. And there's a Jeeves and Wooster book by P.J. Wodehouse entitled Joy Comes in the Morning. And Wodehouse took that title directly from that verse in Psalm 30. And the story behind that title is rather fascinating. Wodehouse was living in France when the Germans invaded in 1940. He was interned as a British national, spending time in several internment camps. He'd already begun writing Joy in the Morning before his internment, and he continued working on it through the upheaval of those years, eventually completing it after his release. And during his internment, he also wrote other comic fiction. And there's something quite striking about this, I think. Here is a man living through one of the darkest periods imaginable, while continuing to create these wonderfully silly books about Bertie Wooster, Jeeves, country houses, and ridiculous misunderstandings genuinely taking place in the sunshine in rural England. And the title he eventually gave the book was that title I've already mentioned, Joy in the Morning. And what's striking about his decision to use that title is that Wodehouse wasn't a professing Christian. He described himself as an agnostic. So I'm not going to pretend that there was some secret Christian preaching in Jeeves and Wooster books. But I do think there's something rather wonderful about the way that words from Scripture can lodge themselves in us, sometimes even in places we don't expect. And that's what we saw with Wodehouse. And that links to the bigger theme of our sermons this summer, spotting grace, spotting faith. In today's context, spotting hope out in the wild, as it were, finding echoes of God's truth in unexpected places. But the theme of hope preserved in unlikely places and dark places is actually the heart of the Christian gospel, isn't it? Because it really, really does point us to the cross. And I think we're quite good at sitting with this on Good Friday, but I'm not sure how often we sit with it at other times. Take yourself in your mind back to that first Good Friday. Jesus is dying on the cross. His followers, his disciples, his mother, the women who cared for him and loved him, they're all standing there on that awful day, watching him die. And as he breathes his last, as he says, it is finished, the sky goes dark. That is complete desolation for those people. That is everything they had hoped for gone. That is the weeping that may stay for the night. It's the most extreme example of darkness, of the bottom falling out of the world, of complete and utter desolation. And that's why Easter Sunday is so joyful, because joy comes in the morning. What those people thought was their darkest hour was actually the moment through which God was going to bring salvation. The cross wasn't the end. The grave wasn't the end. Death wasn't the end, because Jesus rose again. We see the joy and the power of God in Jesus' resurrection. And that's why Christian hope is different from the cheap hope that I mentioned earlier. Cheap hope says, don't worry, don't look at the darkness, everything will be fine. But Christian hope is rooted in reality. It's rooted in the reality that things do get dark, things do get horrible, things do go wrong, people we love die, prayers sometimes seem unanswered, relationships break down, illness comes, families struggle, we worry about the future, and sometimes life just genuinely hurts. But the Christian gospel doesn't ask us to pretend otherwise. Good Friday tells us that God himself is not distant from suffering. Good Friday tells us that God enters into suffering with us. So part of the Christian gospel is embracing the fact that the darkness is real. And perhaps that's important to say because we're in that darkness now. Perhaps you're carrying something that nobody else knows about. Perhaps you're grieving someone you love. Perhaps you're worried about your health or your family or your finances or your future. Christian hope doesn't require you to stand there and say, it's fine, not worried, everything's going to be all right. This is not Dory from Finding Dory, just singing, just keep swimming, just keep swimming. We don't have to manufacture happiness. We don't have to pretend we're not hurting. We don't have to deny the night. You bring the night to God, which is what Psalm 30 is about. Psalm 30 doesn't say everything is awesome. It cries out, hear, Lord, and be merciful to me. Lord, be my help. That's a prayer that we can all pray. The promise of Christian hope isn't necessarily that our particular circumstances will get better tomorrow morning. Sometimes they do. But Christian hope is bigger than that. It's the confidence that whatever happens in this life, death does not have the final word because Jesus has already defeated death. The resurrection tells us the worst thing that can happen is not the end of the story. And that changes how we walk through darkness. That means that even when we can't see a way out, we know who is there with us in the darkness. And that means we know where the story ultimately ends. As I come to close, I want to briefly return to RAYE's album because I've not really told you much about it other than the title. But when I listened to it, I was genuinely quite moved by it. I won't talk you through every moment of the album because you might want to sit and listen to it yourself. But it begins with a number of songs dealing with the issues and struggles of being a young woman in the 2020s. It explores mental health, self-esteem, looking for love, and acknowledging how hard everything can be. But then it pivots with a song that's simply titled Joy and references Psalm 30 and particularly that verse we've been thinking about, joy comes in the morning. And the album finishes with a track called Finn, which leaves the listener with a challenge. It says words to the effect of, if you didn't hear hope in this album, can I humbly suggest that you listen to it again? And maybe that's my main application for this sermon. If when you look for hope in your life, you cannot see any, can I humbly suggest that you look again? Not by pretending that the darkness isn't there, not by just telling yourself everything's going to be all right, but by looking at your circumstances through the lens of the resurrection. Because the resurrection tells us that what looks like the end is not the end. The cross looked like the end. The grave looked like the end. Jesus' death looked like the end, but it wasn't. And so if you cannot see hope, look again. Look again through the lens of the resurrection.